I thought, first and foremost, thank you for all of you guys agreeing to participate in this commission. This is very, very important. I'll be honest with you, I did not know the first thing about petroleum pipelines until the beginning of 2015, and I know more than I ever thought I would at this point. In fact, it's expanded for me beyond Georgia and South Carolina. I've actually worked on some national stuff now. So I thought what I would do is take a couple of minutes just to kind of go through the history of how I experienced this pipeline and kind of what I've noticed not only here in South Carolina and throughout the rest of the nation. First and foremost, this showed up on our doorstep when a landowner in Burke County got a note on their door that said, Kinder Morgan is putting a pipeline through your yard, we're coming to survey. There was no information, there was no public notice that was put out at all. It was a notice that showed up on somebody's doorstep. They called me, we looked, there was a one-page website that had a line through my river from Belton, South Carolina, all the way down to Augusta on the South Carolina side, jumped over, went all the way down to the coast, ran along the coast and went to Jacksonville, and said, this is what's needed for Georgia. That's essentially all it was. We started to hold public hearings, like the DOT mentioned before. They were not public hearings. In fact, Kinder Morgan was running those programs. It became very, very clear that the state was caught off guard. We did not know what was coming down the pipe right now, literally, and it was being forced down our throats. I am not somebody who works on property rights usually. I am somebody who protects water. However, I also protect 1.4 million people who drink that water, and those landowners had nobody else to turn to. So that's how I got involved with property rights and I started learning about eminent domain. Eminent domain is the right of usually government to be able to take land for public good. That is in many situations when you're talking about electricity transmission lines, or you're talking about, in some respects, natural gas, that's questionable. But those are situations, roads, bridges, schools, that benefit the public. These are government entities. When you get into transmission lines, you're talking about some privately owned companies, but they follow the Public Safety Commission, they're regulated, their pricing structure, how they operate, where they use the bathroom, all of that is regulated through the state and the federal entities. What we had here was a completely different situation. We had a petroleum company. This is a private company. This is not a public utility. This is not a public entity. This is a private company, the same as Colonial Oil is a private company, right? And last time I checked, you guys have never used eminent domain, right? No. So, it is a private company that has come in and said, okay, well, we should be able to use eminent domain. And unfortunately, in South Carolina specifically, the answer to that was maybe they could, and there wasn't a framework. We were lucky in Georgia in 1990, there was actually a framework put on because a legislator had an issue in his backyard. There was legislation that was put forth. The reason we're sitting here today was because that legislation wasn't good enough, right? We figured that out. So the interesting part about it was, one, we found out in Georgia, like I said, there was a framework. We kind of went through with EPD, for example. One of the things you have to keep in mind, these pipelines are not studied in their entirety in any way, shape, or form. It's all related to eminent domain, right? Even EPD was standing here. We have to regulate this stuff, and we have to turn in permits and requirements on the properties that they want to use eminent domain on. Let me tell you my experience with working with landowners. These landowners, there are many of them that are very well off, and God bless them for being well off. But there are many of them that are land rich and money poor, right? This land has been in their property, or in their families, maybe generations, maybe it's only been there 20 years, but it's all they have in life. And now, through our permitting process that we have in place, a company can show up at their door and say, we're coming to take it. And do you know what they have to do? They have to hire the attorney. They have to go through the system to fight what was the largest pipeline company in the world. So what happens in that situation? A lot of the landowners just give up. In North Dakota right now, there's a huge issue with the pipeline. In North Dakota, they didn't use eminent domain one time. In South Dakota, they did, to put in the Dakota Access Pipeline. But in North Dakota, some of those landowners were signing away easements that were like 10, 20 cents a foot, right? And why were they doing that? Because they didn't feel like they had a choice. That's what eminent domain does. When you allow a private company to use eminent domain, it takes away their ability to negotiate immediately off the bat. You're taking their land and you're not letting them negotiate. So the other thing that I quickly found out was that we were getting national attention. So I promise you right now, I'm sitting here telling you the whole United States is watching what you guys are going to do. And that is because South Carolina and Georgia both changed the law in one legislative session. I'm happy to say I did not stroke out during that. And hopefully I won't again this year, if possible. But both of them stepped up and said, you know what, this process is not right. Again, in South Carolina, there is not a law, so they put a 3-year moratorium on that we need time to actually build this framework. You guys are light years ahead, right? You have a framework, we just need to tweak it. A couple of things that I wanted to share that I've noticed nationwide that has kind of played itself out. One, like I said, eminent domain renders landowners hopeless. Time and time again, they feel like they do not have a choice, and it costs them huge amounts of money to actually fight this. And they fight in vacuums, and it's really not fair. The other thing is that the other ways that we transport petroleum, trucks, right? A truck can't go and decide, hey, I now own this road. Ryan can't go, or a marine company can't go and say, you know what, I now own this terminal. I own this passageway, right? That's an unfair economic advantage. If we are truly a capitalist society and we want to have equal opportunity, you don't let one person have an unfair advantage. And the other one is that petroleum is really not regulated. They can tell you that it's regulated, but it's not. We do not look at these pipelines in a comprehensive way. FERC looks at them and says, okay, your pricing structure. We'll talk about your pricing structure. The rest of it is up to you or it's up to the state to decide. And that's really kind of scary because at the end of the day, nobody's watching. Very quickly, I'm going to jump over to natural gas just because I don't know if you guys know, there was a very large explosion in Millen last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess. It was 2 weeks ago. Natural gas pipeline, Kinder Morgan natural gas pipeline, exploded. Huge fireball exploded, right? Poor Emily, because it's in Emily's watershed, it was during Matthew, she's locked in her house, so I went down there, I called EPD, and I said, EPD, are you guys going to respond? The fire department is saying it sounds like 3, 4 jet engines blowing for hours, all this natural gas escaping, all of Millen to evacuate all the way around, right? So you would assume that EPD would show up, that EPA would show up, that the feds would show up. The answer is no. It was my local fire department, or her local fire department, that showed up. They weren't allowed to get close enough. The sheriff's department wasn't allowed to take pictures because Kinder Morgan said it was not secure. Kinder Morgan is still, as far as I know, a federal agency or state agency has still not shown up to a place where a 13-foot hole was blown in a pipeline in a corridor that has 2 other pipelines. Nobody is regulating them. Petroleum, the same way. EPD is not regulating these guys once they're put in. It's very, very scary. The other ways that we transport petroleum are. The other thing that I'll say is about the spills. The pig that was shown, I want you to think about that pig for a second. It has to be put into the pipeline, right? It has to be put into the pipeline, which means the pipeline has to be turned off. Just take a guess how many times they want to turn the pipeline off to inspect it. You're going to find out that that's not very often. The other thing is that when there is a spill, it is not the pipeline company that finds it. It is the guy in the backyard who smells petroleum, or the miner who's down in a mine that sees the petroleum coming out. 360,000 gallons spilled in Belton, South Carolina, in December of 2014. They have cleaned up, Kinder Morgan has cleaned up less than 1/3 of that. I've been there since the day that they spilled it. Their records, they continually turn in sampling results that are bogus. They're not true. They've taken less than 1/3 of that fuel out, and they have yet to pull a single gallon of gas out of the ground the entirety of 2016. What they're doing is fighting with South Carolina DHEC, saying they don't have to clean it up. Meantime, my landowners that are around that have now lost their land. The people downstream, the creek, the river, the system that is done, it's done for. It's permanently done for, and that's what happens. Pipelines are not safer because when there is a leak, it is catastrophic. And then the other thing, and then I'll stop talking, which is a hard thing for me to do, but the other thing that is worth thinking about is that we do have to think about our infrastructure, right? I drive a big giant truck, I'm not gonna lie. I I do, because I pull a boat, that's why I drive a big giant truck. I use gasoline, right? We have needs, absolutely we have needs. We also have problems. He just told us we have a 50-year-old and a 60-year-old pipeline that is supplying most of our gasoline to the Mid-Atlanta area, right? And what happens when that pipeline, when one of those gets cut off? Now we have 7, 8, 11 days. You've seen what happens to our economy. I would argue that it's our lack of diversification that's got us into this, and allowing them more leniency is only going to make that worse. So we actually have not only the new pipeline issue coming down the pipe, we have very big issues with very old pipelines in the ground right now that are not being dealt with. So I'll get more into the legislation, but I just basically thank you. Thank you for being here.